What's going on, guys, and welcome to the man. I can't even lie to y'all. I lost count. I think it's 33. Anyways, welcome to the Warcry Podcast. I'm your host, Jehola Tiger, and we've been promoting this episode for a little bit now. And before we get to it, the Res Dogs 3 Season 3 has come upon us, and we have seen basically a story of these four kids, young adults, I'll say. I don't know how old they are in the show, but basically go to California and then they're making their way back. And one thing about Res Dogs that kind of hits me kind of in a weird, not in a weird spot, but kind of in a, dare I say, I'm trying to figure out the word. It just hits me strangely, I guess I'll say. Because a lot of the stuff like in the early season, the first season, is stuff that me and like my brother would do. Like we were running around, in the neighborhood, doing res kid things, and I ain't gonna go into what we was doing, but we were all around. We would go to the store and we'd scrounge up some money and we'd buy like slushies, and I think they had even a little chicken. Like every convenience store had like a little roller chicken or whatever. We would do those things, and just res kids riding bikes around, and so it hits me in that way because it reminds me of my days on the Cherokee Res in Tahlequah. But one thing I don't, it's kind of. I think it's kind of and this is a little pushback, I'm gonna say. I love the show and I do support the show, but like one thing that I don't really see a lot in that show is natives doing like big things. Like I guess it is documenting, or it's kind of like giving a look into the like what it looks like on the res. Like you got the IHS and places like that, but we just never seen a lot of successful Indians on that show. Like, there's a lot of us out here that we're doing things. We got a college degree. We got, we got careers and goals. And, I wish it would have seen more on that show, because there are res kids out here that have done it and have made it and own their own businesses and try to be, an upstanding citizen. And so that was one thing that I'd say that I wish I would have seen in that show. I hate that it's only going 3 seasons, but, like I always say, here for a good time, not for a long time. And, you got to get out when you got to get out. And so, but shout out to Sterling Harjo and everybody that's with that. I know there's a lot of people in Indian country part of that. And so, shout out to y'all. Let's get to it, guys. The topic at hand. Today we're going to be talking about aliens. And one thing about aliens that I feel like some people forget, that I think it covers is such a wide-ranging topic and broad conversation. And we're going to hit a bunch of conspiracy theories. I'm going to, at the end of the episode, I got a question for y'all, and I need y'all to answer it. So do it however you do it, or give me your stories, or however you want to explain it. But this whole phenomenon started back in the 50s with Roswell. And then you have, I think there was an incident in Michigan where they found basically an orb or some type of steel contraption, I believe, or something along those lines. But I'm not going to talk about that. I don't really... They beat a dead horse on that, on those stories and that incident. But what I want to talk to you about is some things that maybe you may not have heard of, or you maybe sit in the realm of conspiracy. And I like to live between conspiracy and fact, or like truth, like common truth. And the first thing I want to talk about, to me, is very interesting. This story comes from a guy named Philip Snyder, and he was an explosives engineer at Dulles Air Force Base. This is kind of on the border of Colorado, but it's in New Mexico. And Snyder claims, this guy, I'll give a backstory on this guy. In the mid-90s, he was making rounds of all these alien disclosure conferences. And he was telling people, hey, there's like thousands and thousands of Air Force bases or underground bases that are all over the place, and we're housing these aliens from all the way from the tall grays to the green small humanoids that people see. He said, but we have thousands of bases in this country that are underground. And he goes on to tell this story, and I'm going to tell this story as best as I can. I do have some references. I watched the video. You guys can go find that video of him actually talking about it. It's very long. It's very detailed, but I'm going to hit the high points as best I can. But Snyder, he claims that he was working on a highly secretive underground base, basically on the Apache Reservation in New Mexico, underneath it. Or right off of it, I guess, is really. Near Dulles and near the Colorado border. He told the Huffington Post when he first got suspicious of that project and his true intentions, he noticed that basically American Special Forces soldiers were operating in and around that area, and they were very prominent in that area. But he realized that they don't just send Green Berets to New Mexico for no reason. And we'll talk about Green Berets in another kind of conspiracy that is out there when it comes to these aliens. But Snyder also alleged that the gray aliens were conducting bizarre medical experiments on mankind, both live humans and samples of DNA. He also had, stated that deep underground that the grays would absorb human and cow blood for sustenance. This also kind of tags into another kind of conspiracy with aliens. So cattle mutilations have been going on for a long time. Just here about 6 months ago, there was one here in Oklahoma. Basically, the anus, the blood, the tongue, and the eyes were taken out of these animals. And one of the conspiracy that goes with that is that our anus, this is kind of wild, our anus has in our mouth, in our lips, in our tongue, the cells consistently grow. And there's certain, cells in the eyes that contain certain things that help, it could be anything, regeneration. So all this stuff put together helps these gray aliens, or alien in general, or whatever these outer space extraterrestrial beings, that helps them regenerate. It also helps them with their armor. I know that there's been kind of, some descriptions of them looking like skin cells, like they kind of look. But also too, another thing, it also helps them basically put on the skin of a human or a skin of an animal. That's another kind of thing. But that cattle mutilation has been going on for a long time. I remember seeing on like Animal Planet, they're talking about it. They're like, man, we cannot describe this. And I know Skinwalker Ranch has that basically every all the time. And so it's kind of crazy, how he kind of lines that up and why, that stuff's going on. Another conspiracy that's attached to this is, so everyone's heard of Missing 411 and people going missing in the woods. Well, according to conspiracy, like I said, it's a conspiracy, is that back in World War II, there was agreement between us and the powers that be, the extraterrestrials, but in Antarctica. And so if you guys listen to Operation Paperclip, Robert Byrd goes into, hey, like there's some things that are out of our control. They're out of our power. We are not going to be able to fend these off. And the crazy conspiracy is that he met the blonde ones, the tall ones, is what they're called, and they're called the Nordic beings or Nordic aliens, and they're very tall, blonde hair, blue eyes, and they're very intelligent, and have high technology. But that agreement was that they would take people as a way to not totally invade us and not just take over the entire human race. And that conspiracy is kind of a wild one. I know that there's other kind of ways people talk about missing 411, but that's one of the reasons, because Eisenhower, who I believe at the time was president, is the one that made that deal. And you can type that in, Google that, and go down a rabbit hole. I got lost in the sauce with that conspiracy. But bringing it back to Philip Schneider and him mentioning, like I said, them using humans and animals, cattle, as sustenance, which is kind of crazy. Schneider finally came out with his story in the mid-'90s, and 2 years later, he killed himself with a catheter cord. A suicide that has been screaming foul play. And I remember some people doing some research on that, and they did the crime scene, and it didn't make any sense. How can he get that cord around his neck when he, was sitting in a certain angle? Yeah, it just was very, very strange. And I know some people have been, they've been breaking that down for a lot of years. But Snyder began construction on the underground base, just like he would on any other base. By drilling holes. And this time, when he was drilling the hole for this base around Dulles, he smelled an acid smell that smelled like burning garbage. It just smelled terrible. And when when it emerged from the hole, that's when the fight started, basically. Then one day he turned around and came face to face with a 7-foot tall, stinking gray alien. Dang, imagine just kind of working, you're kind of, you're underground, but you're working and you're just kind of hanging out and doing your job. You're 8 to 4, you're 9 to 5, and all of a sudden you turn around and you see a 7-foot tall alien that smells like booty hole. That would be wild. I would be shooketh. But so then how he tells the story is he grabbed his pistol and he took 2 of them down. A third one blew off some of his fingers with some kind of laser blaster type gun. And that's when one of the Green Berets sacrificed himself to save Snyder's life. The scuffle turned into a full-blown battle that killed 60 Green Berets. And basically the Green Berets acted very quickly and brought in all the big guns, all the firepower that they could bear on these aliens. And the aliens responded by shooting blue bolts of radiant power with their hands, which is kind of wild. It's like that scary movie, was it Scary Movie 3 or Scary Movie 4 when the alien has the finger pee? I don't know why that right. He's like, what do you do? He's like, how do you pee? He's like, out of my finger, and he's putting the finger in his mouth. I don't know why that reminded me of that, but the bolts blew off Snyder's fingers, and then the special forces eventually they ended up getting out of there, and some of them got out of there, but then the aliens kind of relented, they kind of backed off and into a deeper kind of complex, I guess, cave tunnel system, which is kind of crazy. But what happened in the years that followed is anyone's guess, so we really don't know what happened after that. And Snyder, like I said, he made the rounds in the 90s and was telling people about all these bases and these elaborate weapons and things like that. And then, like I mentioned earlier, he had said there's over 1,400 bases or 1,000 bases all over the world. And, that's one thing that's kind of crazy, and, is you just really don't ever really know what's going on out there and what our government is doing. And, that's a lot of the reason why I'm a conspiracy theorist, because the problem is that a lot of conspiracies end up being right, and that's the problem that I have, like with the mainstream. Like they'll say, "Oh, it's conspiracy," but nobody talks about how the CIA and Project Mockingbird had told people back in the 60s and 50s and 60s that, hey, if you don't believe us, you are deemed a conspiracy theorist, and you are looked upon as the dregs of society. You're looked upon as one of those guys who sits in the basement of his mom's house on, some wild channel or a wild website talking about, conspiracy theories. And I'm gonna be honest with you, I ain't that guy. I'm not there, but I just find it very strange and very interesting that how some of these conspiracies line up with other conspiracies. I mentioned missing 411, mentioned the cattle mutilations. But the next one that's kind of very interesting is, and this is a movie that came out in, I want to say it came out like 2007. But if you guys remember the movie Fourth Kind, that movie, I remember seeing that movie and shaking me to my core. And one thing that's kind of crazy about the Fourth Kind is that they said it's based on a true story. Well, that's not true. But they based the movie off Dr. Hynek, who is a doctor who basically opposed the military-industrial complex on if aliens are real. And basically telling the government, like, hey, we need to, get some evidence because there's a lot of people out here seeing flashing lights in the sky that aren't making sense. And basically he published an evidence-based system to where you can classify alien or UFO, UAP encounters. One of them being nocturnal lights, which is simply seeing unidentified lights in the sky. Daylight discs, which is seeing a UFO in the daylight. Radar visual, which is UFO or UAP that appears on radar. Close encounter of the first kind, seeing a UFO within 500 feet. Close encounter with the second kind is seeing a UFO and experiencing, or UAP, and experiencing some kind of physical effect, a vehicle malfunctioning, observing animals reacting, seeing heat from the object, and then close encounters of the third kind, a UFO sighting in which some kind of alien life is also witnessed. The fourth kind, a sighting in which the person is abducted. And the fifth kind is direct contact made by aliens and animals. And, Hynek also served later as a consultant to Steven Spielberg in the Close Encounters of the Third Kind in 1977, which is kind of cool. But a quote from Alan Hynek, which I think is a good one. We have gone from Kitty Hawk to the moon in some 70 years, but it's possible that a 1,000,000-year-old civilization may know something that we don't. And so he was very, big. He was very big in trying to figure out what's going on. And one thing about we go down his list of. Every day people are seeing encounters of the first kind. So they're seeing those lights in the sky. Kind of a crazy story that, I can speak for myself is one night I was out, putting my dogs out. At the time I was staying with my parents, and we go outside, and I thought I heard this, it sounded like a drone sound. It was almost like my ears, it was like it was a different sound than my ears were used to hearing. And all of a sudden I look up and there's this light that's flying in the sky. And I go and get my dad, and he goes, and we both look and we see it. And it's literally, fast across the sky. It's up high, going crazy fast. And it's leaving, kind of a dust. And that's another thing too that kind of ropes into the UAP phenomenon, that they're dropping off chemtrails. I know Prince back in the 90s had, basically said, had come out against chemtrails and saying, hey, y'all are dropping something. We don't know what it is, but we need to figure it out. And, that's kind of interesting, that I myself have seen that multiple times where, especially in the daytime and in the nighttime, that you can see that kind of quick moving type of entity or UAP or whatever you want to call it. But then we kind of move on to the second kind, seeing a UAP and experiencing some kind of physical effect. One thing that was really big, and I saw it was called Skinwalker Ranch. It's a documentary by Jeremy Corbin, and he went into the Uinta Basin was investigating UFO and UAP experiences with native people in the Uinta Basin. And one thing that was kind of crazy to me was that like all these natives were saying that they were like seeing these green lights hovering over their houses, and they were seeing these. It was almost like a hypnotic light that just kind of made you look like into it. And they like one of the Indian guys was saying that basically it was almost like he was getting took, but he wasn't getting took, but like he was looking into the light like you see in the movies. And, they experience those types of things all the time. And, one person I know in the documentary had mentioned, and I know I've seen multiple documentaries of them saying they saw these lights and the lights hit them and then they just got sick. And they, cancer, some type of crazy sickness come on them. In the Hunt for the Skinwalker Ranch TV show, there was one guy who basically was trying to figure out a way to dig on this property. Well, every time a certain guy dug, he would get like his head would go melon head, like it went like crazy, like elongated. And they do things to you like that when you're doing too much. And I think that guy, this craziest guy's like, yeah, I almost died from the last time we did it, but let's go ahead and dig again and see what happens. It's like, bro, you're on national television. If you die on national television, that's kind of wild. But, then we move on to the third kind, which is seeing the life, an alien. And that's one thing people kind of associate with sleep paralysis, too, is that they see these aliens. Like, there's been multiple kind of studies and sightings and encounters where people are in sleep paralysis and they see the aliens coming to get them, and they're usually like little small gray aliens. And that's another thing too that's kind of interesting about the third kind aspect is basically you're seeing these things, and then it turns into the fourth kind where you're basically getting took. And the one thing that's kind of crazy to me is that people all over the place have experienced being taken and then waking up and not feeling right, and then going to the doctor and they do like a x-ray or something like that, and they're like, oh, you got all this kind of crazy metal in your body. And a lot of times that metal is not a metal that's here in America or on this planet. And so that's one thing that's kind of crazy about this whole alien UAP type of, I guess, topic is what we really don't know. And in kind of my opinion is I don't really believe in aliens. And here's why. I think what we see in the UAP and the flashing lights is us. And I'll credit Russell Sun Eagle to this theory because he made me think about it, and I really started thinking about it. Is what if we're seeing future humans or, alien, or maybe not aliens, but like us doing experiments on us now to get for them. This is gonna sound so confusing. So they are doing experiments and making sure, and basically doing medical experiments on us and seeing how we react to them. And maybe it's them from the future because we did something in the near future that changed the course and it made them different. And maybe it's them protecting us from ourselves, and it's us, it's humans, it's future humans. And that's kind of my thought on aliens, is because, they say we live in, there's been multiple maps and stuff that we live in like a terrarium. We live in kind of a snow globe. And I'm not a flat earther, and I know that's kind of flat earther talk, but I've seen too many clips of them getting to a certain point in the atmosphere, and they doink off some type of force field. So I think it was the SpaceX when they just shot it up in the air to see how far it would go. It doinked off some type of glass. Another thing too that's kind of crazy about the UAP is we see these. Sometimes there has been a lot of sightings of government, or not sightings, but accounts of government employees who have worked in these facilities saying that it's us, that we're the ones, we found this technology somewhere. They don't know where, but we found it and we're trying to make it our own. Because one thing that's very kind of crazy over the course of history is we jumped from basically walking on our feet and riding horses. Within 100 years, we're in a car. We're in 100 years, we're flying. And to me, in my head, that does not make sense to how we as humans can do that. It's like showing the first humans fire and showing humans how to make a wheel. Because then if you make a wheel, you can carry things. You can figure out a way to carry things. And I'm not a really big proponent of the alien theory. I mean, I think that there's some type of weird stuff. I know we could. I'm kind of saving the reptoid, the reptilian side, because I know that I'm going to save that for a future episode. I know there's some people like, oh, when are you going to talk about the reptilians? Well, not this episode. This is just pure alien, like how we see in the movies, like, and things like that. And that's like I said. That's one thing that, like I said, I'm still kind of on the fence about is, how do we make those progressions? And it could, like I said, it could be alien, beings. And we look at the pyramids, and I know Ancient Aliens is a huge show on History Channel, and they always talk about, well, there's no way that ancient humans can make this cut right here. And they'll show you like the pyramids and how they're all cut like symmetrical and everything is, perfect. And that's one thing that I have a problem with the alien theory is like, we don't know what type of, ancient knowledge that we've lost. But we just want to put it on aliens because it's the easiest thing because we don't know how to explain it. But, I want to ask you guys this question. Do you believe in aliens? Do you believe in the conspiracies that I mentioned with Missing 411 and with cattle mutilations? Or are you just somebody like, hey, let's let it play out and let's let God, I'm in the boat where I'm not really a big alien person, but I'm always so open to any type of thing. Because, like, you never know. I could, be asleep, and next thing I know, I'm, like, fully awake, and I got a great alien standing in my kitchen. Then I'll be like, and I'll come back on the podcast and let y'all know, like, hey, I believe in I believe in aliens now. But I appreciate you guys listening in. We're almost at 7,000 audio listens, which is wild. I know we took a big jump from 5,000 to 7,000. In the last episode, I kind of messed up on the how many we were listening. I was trying to get out of there, but like I said, we're at 7,000, and I can't thank you guys enough. And wait, before we go, I got one more kind of weird alien story. It just reminded me really quickly. So I had I used to do a podcast with a bunch of guys back like it'll be about 10 years ago, and we were talking, and we were kind of talking about the Malaysian air flight, which that people do say that has a lot of alien, that the aliens took them and then they crashed the plane and those people were never found again. That's another alien conspiracy. But there's a ton of them, and I didn't want to hit a lot of the ones that people already kind of knew. But we were talking about that, and the next morning, the Wi-Fi went out, and we couldn't be able to record. Like, my phone was like, I was the one that was like the main operator, like, and my phone would not work. Like, it would just shut off. It would not come on. I had to put it on the charger, and then finally it turned back on. And I had a full charge. Like, it wasn't like it was like 2%, and I started the podcast or started the episode. And the next morning, I remember going outside, and there were next to the pole. There was a pole that we replaced, and it was like the size of a pizza pan. Like, y'all ever see those giant pizzas that are like 65-inch pizzas? It was like someone like took molten, like really, really hot pan and put it on green grass and let the grass burn and then pulled it up and then sprayed it down with water. And it made this perfect circle. And I thought that was the strangest thing too, because there was a lot of weird stuff going on at that time where we were seeing like shadows, and we were seeing things outside, and eventually on a future episode, I'm going to do basically my life stories, and I'll go down from when I was a child to now, and I've still got things happening now that kind of freak me out. They're kind of weird, and I have to kind of be careful. But I appreciate everybody that listens to the podcast. Like I said, it's growing. We have a new Instagram, Warcry Pod on Instagram. TikTok, Warcry Pod. The new email is, if you want to send me your stories, This Is Creepy Part 3 is coming. And This Is Creepy Part 4. I'm working on both of those episodes at the same time. So if you want to have a anonymous story, or you just want to talk, or you just want to say, hey, this happened, because I had on the new, on This Is Creepy Part 3, I talked to a gentleman who has some inside knowledge on a Bigfoot video, and he would like to remain anonymous, but he has some information on that, and so I'm going to be sharing that. And so if you have anything like that, or if you want to just say, hey, there's been sightings of a DW or LP in this area here, go ahead and share that. But the email to send that to is realwarcrypod@gmail.com. And then you can message me on Facebook, which is Yahola Tiger, or you can go to the Warcry Podcast Facebook page, and you can message there too. But get your stories in. Like I said, we're going to keep this series going as long as y'all share stories. After we do that, I'm going to do kind of my own stories, my life stories. And I mentioned like in an earlier episode that I would get to those, and I had a lot of weird, creepy stuff going on in my life growing up. And then I want to do some family stories, and eventually I'm going to reach out to some of my aunts and my uncles, and I'm going to try to get them, I'm going to force them. No, I'm just kidding. But I'm going to try to get them on the podcast to tell their stories, and we'll do some Tiger family stories. And those are old Creek stories as well. And so, but I appreciate you guys listening to the podcast, and I will catch you on the next one.